So tonight I wanted to talk about the upside of discontent. So there's probably two ways to think about contentedness. One is, a state of stagnation, like, hey man, I'm just content, with my life as it is. I'll eat, drink, and be merry, and that's sort of one one type of contentedness. The other type is just it's really a state of grace. It's just we've examined the alternatives, and what's left is content with things as they are. But there's just that one similarity, but there's a world of difference between the two, and that's really what the spiritual journey is about. Is going from where we take life to be just what it appears to be, what we've been told it is, what society thinks it is, what the general consensus agrees that it is. But there's an underlying sense that it's something that's not quite right. There's something missing. There's a sense of being quite suspicious in a way that there must be more to this than what meets the eye. And following that discontent is the journey. It's not being satisfied with things as they are, feeling like things as they are, they may be okay. Things on a superficial level might be even pretty good, right? Life might be going well. So it's not to deny anything on that level, but there can still be a sense of, yes, but there's something still missing. There's something incomplete. There's some level of dissatisfaction, some level of staleness. And that feeling, we can take it as a bad thing, that we need to try to rid ourselves of those kinds of feelings. Or we can use that same energy, that energy of dissatisfaction, discontent, as because it's just energy, right? It's just a feeling, an emotion, and to deny its source would be to miss the point of it. So it's just really using that energy to, get us up off the couch, metaphorically or physically, to get us, push us out of our comfort zone, to look for something deeper, something more meaningful, something to make sense out of life, to feel like this life is meaningful, that somehow being alive has importance to it. So what most people do with this sense of dissatisfaction or discontentment is trying to make the feeling go away, right, as quickly as possible. So there are, drugs of all kinds, some in a glass, some in a pill form, that can do that, certainly on a temporary basis, that can make you forget about it or feel better, for a short time. And there's also activities that have more or less the same effect, maybe without quite the same side effects, but can sort of relieve us of that tension for a short time. We can eat, it's always activity that can produce a certain contentment for a period of time. Sex works quite well in that regard. We can see a movie, we can hang out with friends. There's lots of enjoyable things that we can do. We can also, engage just in mental activities, just sit around and recall some pleasurable time from the past, reminisce with ourselves or with friends, and hope that that will create a sense of okayness for a short period of time. Or we can dream about how the future may unfold in ways that will be pleasurable. So all of these things, nothing wrong with it, enjoying life, and there's no benefit in trying to avoid activities that we enjoy, but it's important to make a distinction between what we're enjoying for just the sheer enjoyment of it, and what we're doing with the underlying neediness of just trying to distract us from any sense of discontent, right? Boredom. Boredom's a good one. So we engage in activities that we can forget about it for a while. We can also use meditation in the same way. Right? If we're using it more or less as a drug to put us back together, to make us feel okay, to get us through the next day, to sort of calm our nerves, and get us back to feeling normal or centered, that's fine. But if we're doing that also simply to avoid some deeper feelings that we're not quite ready to look at, then we're engaged in the same kind of avoiding activity. I mean, in a more healthy way, sure. It's better than the pill form of it, but if we're doing it purely, for the purpose of sort of, keeping us, keeping our head above water, it's okay, it's good, it's better than nothing, but we're sort of missing the deeper point there that the discontent offers us by pointing to something that can be looked at, something that we're holding, some belief, some attitude, some unforgiveness, some judgment, some tendency that we're holding on to that we're not quite ready to look at. And so the way to manage that for most people is just to keep up that level of distraction from one thing to the next, so that we don't have to think about it, right? So it's sort of like treading water, you can keep your head above water doing that. But the thing is, you can't stop. You can't stop treading water. If you stop treading water, you drown. So you have to keep up that level of, activity and distraction in order not to think about those things that may be causing a bit of concern, in those, darker corners of our mind, right? So, but this would be like, sort of like taking an aspirin to solve the headache. I mean, when we need to do that, we need to do that. That's fine. But if the deeper question is what was causing the headache in the first place? It wasn't the absence of aspirin, right? There's some deeper, in this case, physiological issue, some kind of imbalance, perhaps. That's what needs to be looked at. The aspirin might be a stopgap measure, fine, but the deeper issue is what's the underlying cause, if it's a repetitive event. It's also similar to, the warning gauge on your car, that says you're out of oil. I mean, one way to deal with it is just to unplug the gauge, and then the problem's solved, right? But we haven't really dealt with the underlying issue. We've just sort of postponed it. In the case of the car, we'll pay for it later. So this discontent is what pushes us forward if we're willing to use it, if we're willing to see it as our friend rather than our enemy. That one of the ways it's referred to in this regard is divine discontent. A gift from the divine for our benefit. This discontent, this energy that is uncomfortable, right? And we don't necessarily like it. It's pushing us, it's nudging us past where we may be comfortable. But this is the purpose of it. I mean, this is the benefit of it if we allow it to be used in that way. It's using the energy that may feel uncomfortable, but it's using that energy for our long-term benefit. When we first get into spirituality, we think, peace and joy and bliss and love, it'll be great. And sometimes we can be a little bit shocked when there might be, some period of that. We'll drag that phase out as long as we possibly can. But at some point, we may be called to look at things in a deeper way. And when that begins to be called for, we can wonder what happened. Suddenly everything was going so well, I felt so good, and now, I may feel more self-conscious than I used to. Not self-conscious in a good way, self-conscious in a sort of awkward way. Self-conscious in a way that we become more aware of our pettiness and inauthenticity and occasional rudeness and judgmentalism and those kind of things. Right? So we may become more aware of those things. So suddenly there's more discomfort. We were hoping for more joy, and here we are, being pulled through is this sort of level of muck, right? We didn't sign up for that. So we can take that the wrong way. We can take it as, something's gone terribly wrong here. I've really gone astray, or we might even try to hide it from ourselves or from other people. Like, I'm not really going through this. I'm really too spiritual for it. I'm too advanced to really have to be dealing with any of this shadow work. Not necessarily, right? It unfolds the way it unfolds. And if something is coming up for us, and not as a one-off event, but as something that repeatedly sort of comes to the fore, then we need to look at it. And this is where self-honesty comes in. Right? This is where our willingness to see is more important than our desire for comfort. If we always opt for comfort, we'll never get very far down this road. This isn't to say that, beautiful, exhilarating, wonderfully revelatory times aren't had along the journey, but it's also important to acknowledge that There can also be very difficult times, and they're not opposed to the journey. They're actually essential to the journey, essential that we be willing to see them clearly, right? So by seeing them clearly, I simply mean being willing to observe them, sort of almost like a good scientist, look at them as objectively as we can without thinking that we know the answer already, without prejudging anything or without, trying to get to the right answer, not trying to shortcut the process, but really looking directly for ourselves, without self-judgment. That's really important. If we're trying to be the observer and then trying to be the judge at the same time, we can't do both. To allow whatever is whatever experience or situation is up for us, to allow that to be seen clearly. We can't be judging ourselves at the same time. We need to just see it as it is, living color, as it is. And this takes, like I said, some self-honesty. It takes some courage, right? It takes some willingness, it takes some sincerity. These values are critical. They really are. They may seem sort of mundane and often spoken about, but they really are critical in this process. So it's really using this discontent rather than just trying to make it go away however we can. It's recognizing that the discontent is pointing out something that we're not seeing quite clearly. Another word for discontent is really suffering, right? Suffering in the sense of we're not happy with how things are at the moment, right? So as I've talked about before, we can draw a distinction between pain and suffering, right? Pain can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be grief. And very often it's unavoidable. It's just as it is, just the sheer physicality of it, the sheer energy of it. And then there's what we tell ourselves about the pain. That's where the suffering part comes in. If we're telling ourselves that it shouldn't happen, or it's not right, or why is this happening to me, or it's not fair, or life isn't fair, somebody shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have done that. All these things that we tell ourselves about the raw fact of the pain causes suffering. Right? So suffering is always a pointer. It's good to presume that suffering is always a pointer. For one reason, it's true, right? And for the other reason, if we presume that, then we are willing to look at the underlying causes. If we presume that, what's making me suffer is wrong, it shouldn't happen, then we're just arguing with the fact of it. We haven't scratched the surface yet. We haven't really delved beneath the surface enough to see what it is that I'm believing that's causing this argument with life, right? So this kind of self-inquiry that we're talking about may take some time, right? It's in a sense, it's self-disassembly, right? Disassembling things that we thought were true about ourselves. So it's not an easy process. It's a bit like self-surgery, you know. It can sound okay when we're just talking about it conceptually, like, yeah, it'd be nice to unload some of my false beliefs and my conditioning, that would be good. But when the reality of it actually is in our face, it has a whole different feel about it. It feels very real, and it feels very personal. And that's when it becomes especially important to be willing to go through this period of self-examination. So we have this, longing for the divine, however we might phrase that, longing for unity, longing for peace, joy, love, happiness. We have that underlying sense of longing for something that we feel is not already present. But then we also have this sense of discontent that's sort of pushing us from the other side, like, I'm not content with things as they are. I'm willing to look deeper. I'm willing to sort of put myself up on the operating table and really see what's going on there. So in a sense, it's a bit like the carrot and the stick. The carrot is our longing, our spiritual aspirations, and then the discontent is more like the stick. It's something pushing us from behind to keep us moving further, right? Because there's always a tendency to think of, I've done a lot of work on myself, I'm sure it's time to take a rest, I feel like I'm pretty well there. But when we really are willing to sense this discontent for ourselves, what that feels like, there's always this movement of there's something more to see. There's more questions. There's more doubts to dispel, more places to explore, more shadow work to be done. So this is this impetus pushing us further. So if we view the discontent in that way, we can see that it's a good thing, right? It may not be comfortable, may not even be that much fun, but if we can really sense into the worthiness of that energetic movement, we can appreciate it and work with it and use that as the tool that it is. So this, it seems sort of paradoxical. We're talking about making effort, maybe making a considerable amount of effort over some period of time to reach an effortless state. It sounds to our normal human conceptual way of thinking about things, it doesn't sound like that should work that way. We should all be able to just go directly towards contentment, just see that discontent is not what we want and just go for contentment. We think that should work. But perhaps we can see that, trying to be content contradicts itself, right? Contentment is being okay with things exactly as they are. So if we're trying to be content, it only means that we're not okay with things as they are. Therefore, to try to be content doesn't work. It's also not possible to try to be what we already are, because any level of trying on that level is a denial of what we already are. So if our essential being, that which already is already at peace, is already content, trying to be content is a denial of that. We deny that, and we can look forever everywhere else, and we won't find it. So it's actually much, much more valuable to see all of the ways that we create our own discontentment. That's what it's good for, right? So when that sense of suffering or not all rightness or discontent or restlessness or boredom or any of those states that we classify as negative states arises, we can, rather than just trying to dismiss them, we can take them as opportunities to look deeper. So it's not like we have to seek out suffering. Life does a perfectly adequate job of that. So we don't have to manufacture it, conjure up an issue to try to solve it. We don't have to take it to that extreme. That's been tried. Some religious cultures have taken suffering to be a competitive sport, trying to out, the monks all trying to, punish themselves more than all the other monks, right? So there's a certain level of egoism in that, right? I am the most long-suffering monk here. Right? Ego, through and through. So that doesn't work. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is when those times of discomfort, suffering, restlessness, boredom, etc. arise, they're pointers, and we can use those as opportunities to look more deeply at our beliefs that may be causing those. Right? Like, what am I believing in this moment that life is failing to deliver? What am I believing right now that is absent that should be present? What am I believing that things should be other than exactly as they are in this moment? Those kind of questions. Right? So this is also isn't what we're talking about isn't higher self-judging, a lower, more juvenile self, where the higher self believes that it's the only adult in the room. Now, we're not talking about that, because that's just all mental activity, with one thought trying to blame, some other memory or other thought. That, again, it's just mental activity, one thought trying to scold, some other part of our past or whatever, all mental activity. So we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about the beliefs that hold this dissatisfaction in place, what those beliefs are. So it's a belief like, what is causing me not to see, I don't know, the perfection of this moment, the unity of all things, those kind of questions. And if that's a much more useful approach than saying, when am I going to be able to, have the experience of unity? Come on, life. I'm impatient here. I want to see it. It's much more valuable to look at what am I believing that's causing me not to see the unity of all things in this moment, right? The problem is with, the oneness of all, playing coy. That's not the problem. It's the degree to which we are convincing ourselves that we're separate, unworthy, flawed, damaged, slow. It's just our ability to convince ourselves of things that aren't actually fundamentally true. It's a denial of that which we actually are. So this process is, like I say, it can go on for some time, maybe a long time. It will take as much time as it takes. It will go more quickly if we are sincere, if we're curious, if we bring some energy to it, if we bring a certain level of devotion to it, as in committing a certain amount of time to that exploration, a certain level of real investigation. It can go quite quickly. If we are hesitant to look, at places that we don't really want to look at, if we relinquish, give ourselves into the fear, if we're affected by fear to the extent that we just don't go there, if we believe we know where the path leads, these kinds of impositions on the process will prolong it. I mean, the good news is you're already that. So there's, we're just talking about process here. We're not talking about fundamental reality. But, we can accelerate or we can prolong that process, and that's up to us. We can't prolong it forever. That's the good news. You can't prolong it forever because you are already that, and we can't avoid seeing that forever. Maybe for a long time, but not forever. So ultimately, there's no worries here. But life is also much more enjoyable when we can see what is actually living this life that is free of the beliefs that are causing us to suffer, causing us this discontent. And the primary belief is that things should be other than as they are. That one belief is sufficient. Sufficient to postpone our enlightenment and sufficient to maintain this level of discontent. So the point of this discontent isn't a lifelong process. This is a process with a hopefully a limited shelf life. It has a certain duration. It may be necessary. It may be necessary, and almost always is necessary to make considerable effort before that effortless state is realized. But there is an inflection point in there where we can question, inquire, search, really, really look. And there is a point where that's no longer needed or beneficial, that inflection point. And that point, if we try to bypass the effortful working with discontent phase, it would be too soon. We'd be trying to bypass things that we needed to see. But if we wait too long, and hang on to the process, giving our mind over to allowing it to raise questions in order to answer questions, allow doubt to create, reason to doubt what we may have already experienced, then at some point, perhaps we get wise to this tendency of mind to try to perpetuate its control, right? It's like allowing the mind to say, yes, but, have you thought of this? Here's one more question. Did you really experience what you really experienced? How do you know that's true? Those kind of questions. So it's really being willing to admit what we don't know, and being willing to live by what we do know, not denying that. So there's a point where it's not that our questions all get answered, but the questioner no longer has the capacity to create questions that we can really believe in. It's the questioner that gets diminished, gets undermined. So it's not that all the questions get answered, it's the questioner gets undone. And so we're left with no more questions at some point. Or what questions come up just aren't that believable, just aren't that compelling. We can see it, no, it's sort of like the last question. It's not really a new question, not really a really compelling question. We can begin to see that the mind is just trying to perpetuate its control over what we believe, right? So at some point we see that, and we just sort of gently remove that authority from the thinking mind. The thinking mind may go on trying to entice us into thinking about the next thing, the next question, the next doubt. But at some point we see, well, that's not actually, I'm not going to fall for that again. So it's not that we've answered all the questions or, fully satisfied all those doubts. It's just that we can no longer believe our beliefs. Believe that thinking mind, its questions that it can generate to keep us engaged, to keep us grateful for its role as our manager. Sort of like Britney Spears, has this, or had this conservator to sort of manage her affairs. That's the role that we give the mind. Okay, just bringing in a little social context there. So in this process, it's really important to trust the process. We may not have any idea where the process is going, and that's okay. We don't need to know. It may actually be more helpful not to think that we know how this is all going to unfold, because it will unfold in a way that's unique for each of us. So even if we know well somebody else's story as it may be described, it's not actually, it might be inspiring, but it's not like a practical guide, because the way it will unfold for all of us will be unique. And so, and not only unique, but life knows how this will unfold much better than we do. I mean, like infinitely better than we do. And we can ask, well, how do I know if the right experience, how do I know that life is presenting me with the right experiences to take me further along the path? How do I know life is doing that? And the answer is there's an easy way to know. It's just however life is presenting itself in that moment is the way, is the pointer. Life at every moment is pointing to something deeper. And we can just look at that as on a superficial level, or we can see that life is always sort of nudging us further if we allow it to do that, if we take that for the gift that it is. So using this discontent, when it arises, we don't have to manufacture it, but when it arises, to just use it as an opportunity to see what that underlying belief is. There's something to be revealed there. And that process, like I say, will take as long as it takes. And at some point, we need to be sensitive to what I've called this inflection point, where, we've got our, before that we have our foot on the gas, and then after that, we take our foot off the gas, hands off the wheel, and let it happen. There's a common metaphor in Buddhist literature about if when you come up to cross the river to get to the other side, a boat is really handy, and you use the boat to get to the other shore. But when you get to the other shore, you can stop carrying the boat. You don't need to put the boat on your head and keep going. The boat has served its purpose. It's gotten you to the other shore. Right? So that's the purpose of this discontent, is to take us to the other shore when we can, we no longer need that tool. And what remains is contentment. Things will still be revealed, but it's not out of a sense of discontent. It's out of a sense of things are as they are, and actually couldn't be anything other than that. And so there's a contentment. Things still will be revealed, but the tool that this discontentment can serve for a while is not a forever thing. Right, so we can be grateful when that tool is needed. We have the boat to cross the river. When we're on the other side, we can be grateful for the boat, but we don't need to keep carrying it. right? And we can go on. Right? And the contentment is what's left when all our arguments are dropped, right? When all our hopes are dashed, when all our expectations have been crushed, and we're left with just life as it is, without our manipulation. And that is freedom. That is being relieved of our expectations, our hopes, our dreams, our ambitions, our wants, our desires, our demands, being freed from that, and what's left is life as it shows up. And we can be here to simply enjoy that, participate in that, be amazed by it. Contentment is what's left when all of our arguments are against life, about other people, about ourselves, are seen as illusory. And what's left is peace, is contentment, is joy. Because it's what we are.